jer je to bila nova situacija. Očekujemo sad da oni tu elektroenergetsku pripreme, zašto za elektroenergetsku novu i da zapravo idemo dalje što prije s tim. Drugo,
Ja ću zamoliti samo sve sudionike da si isključe mikrofone kako se ne bi ometali. Hvala.
Well, good morning to all of you. I have the honor of welcoming you to the Good Energy Project webinar about solar power from a municipality view and sharing experiences from Norway. My name is Steiner Korsmo, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Seed Forum Norway Foundation, which is one of the two Norwegian partners to the project. The agenda for today is first of all a short introduction by Alexander Major, who is representing the Istra region and who is also the project coordinator of Good Energy. Thereafter, we will have also a short introduction by Mr. Ketil Strøm Larsen, who is a senior business developer in the second Norwegian partner to this project, Greenstat. And he has a sole responsibility in Greenstat for Southeast Europe, working with solar, wind, and green hydrogen solutions. And thereafter, we will have a lecture of somewhere between 45 minutes and 1 hour, which is a deep diving into exactly the topic of the webinar. And that will be held by Dr. Charly Berthod, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Greenstat. I would kindly ask all participants, if you have questions during the introductions and the lecture, please do not hesitate to paste those questions in the chat, which is below on your screen. So we will have all those questions hopefully being answered in a Q&A session after the lecture by Mr. Berthod. First of all, I have the honor of welcoming then Mr. Alexander Major, the project coordinator of this project. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steiner. Dear partners and esteemed guests, welcome to our webinar, Solar Power from a Municipality View, which will be held by Dr. Charly Berthod. It is my honor to give you a brief introduction to the webinar with a few words on the project itself, which made this webinar possible. But first, I'd like to thank our Norwegian partners, Greenstat Energy and Seed Forum Global, for their commitment and efforts in organizing this webinar. I will continue in Croatian so our partners here from Croatia can understand. Projekt Dobra energija, solarna energija za energetsku tranziciju, financiran je sa 1,1 milion eura iz EGP financijskog mehanizma za razdoblje od 2014. do 2021. godine u okviru provedbe programa Energija i klimatske promjene s ciljem podizanja kapaciteta proizvodnje energije iz obnovljivih izvora. Svi smo svjesni rasta cijene električne energije i povećanja troškova koje ona nosi. Gradovi i županije u Hrvatskoj, kao i građani, u nastojanjima da pronađu rješenje, okreću se sve više solarnoj energiji koja je isplativa i lako dostupna. Upravo ovo okretanje solarnoj energiji dovelo je do velike potražnje za solarnim sustavima i nestašice na tržištu, ali i do povećanja cijene samih sustava. Usprkos tome, investiranje u solarnu energiju i dalje ostaje vrlo isplativo, pogotovo za velike potrošače, sa rokom povrata negdje između 7 do 10 godina. Ukoliko se uzme u obzir životni vijek solarnih sustava koji je 25 godina, vjerujem da nema dvojbi o tome isplati li se investirati u ovu tehnologiju ili ne. Projektom Dobra energija također se prepoznala vrijednost solarne energije i kroz projekt planiramo postaviti 22 solarne elektrane zbrojene snage otprilike 1 megavata. Prve elektrane se već postavljaju na određenim lokacijama i očekujemo da će sve biti u funkciji već do kraja ove godine. I will stop here with the introduction and would like to thank you all for your interest in today's webinar, and back to you, Steiner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexander. I then have the honor of introducing Mr. Ketil Strøm Larsen, the senior business developer of Greenstat. And Ketil, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Steinar, and thank you, Alexander. It's been a pleasure so far being in this project, and Greenstat is very pleased to hold this, let's say, webinar about solar possibilities in the municipalities. My colleague will very soon have this conference, and I will unfortunately leave you because I'm in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, for a meeting there regarding our solar park in Bosnia. So it's a pleasure to introduce Mr. Charly Berthod, who's got a PhD in solar temperature coefficient and has the almost only reason that I joined Greenstat 2 years ago. He's the most likely person and also a very, very interesting person. So he convinced me that this solar business will be the future, and so far he's been correct. So let's give him 45 minutes to explain us how and why the solar industry will take over the energy market. Welcome, Charly Berthod.
Thank you, Setil, for the kind and a bit over the top introduction. Thank you to all partners. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today and to present a bit about solar energy. I'm going to share my presentation for today. Unfortunately, I got a bit of a cold, so on top of being French and having a strong French accent when I talk English, then you'll have to also bear with me with a bit of a weird voice today, so that will not help. Yes, so my background is that I have a PhD in the physics of solar cells. So I come actually from the academy, and the academy is public, basically. So I had a public position afterwards, and we did actually procurement and like a public tender for a solar installation on the building where we were sitting. So it's quite fun to talk again about that. But then I joined a company, and I saw also the other face of the coin, to say so. So I've been not just on the people writing the public tender and the criteria, but I've been also on the other side, on the people trying to deliver the best possible solar installation. So this presentation will be a bit of a blend between my knowledge and experience from the academic world and from the industrial world then. And I think it should give a good insight in solar energy and what role you could have in regard to that topic. But first, I will give more of a presentation on a bit of the. Oh, why can't I? I'll try again. Check. A bit of a presentation about solar and how does it work. I think it's very important that we have an as good understanding as possible of a bit of the physics and what are the different parts, what's needed, but also about the technologies. Where can we have solar energy actually? Is it simply on rooftops, or can it be on facades? Can it be on carports? Can it be on railways? Or there are many opportunities, and many companies have developed actually different solutions. That's what makes solar very interesting for me, but also it makes it quite complicated and challenging, and that's actually what we like. So the content of this talk will be first a small introduction about the technology. Then we'll go through the solar panel technology, different installation types, understanding then power versus on consumption. So a lot of power is produced from solar installation, but where does it go? Is it only going to the grid? Is it going first in the building? How do we share that? And then a bit about economy and profitability. Then a few remarks about sustainability. And so I named that, how green can it be? And at the end, last but not least, the role of municipality and counties in the deployment of solar energy. Very short about Greenstat, so that you know what we are doing. We are working in actually 4 focus areas. The first one is green hydrogen, which will replace some of the fossil fuel alternatives that we have for heavy transport, for maritime transport, and also for some industries like fertilizer industry. Then there is solar energy that I'm going to cover in the presentation, and then something that we call industrial wind, which is how can we design wind parks that are creating less conflicts and that are using less natural areas. And so the goal is, and we have many projects already in our pipeline, but it's smaller wind parks next to industrial areas. And so it joins very well with solar energy, where we can build already a lot of solar installations on buildings and not take any natural area at all. And so it's kind of the same concept, but translated into wind energy. And then there is charging stations for electric vehicles, but it's not present here. That was our company in 2022. But we have hired even more today. The solar group was actually the fastest growing group inside of Greenstat, and we installed on rooftop. We installed 3 megawatts last year, aiming for maybe a doubling this year, and then we are now in the construction phase of a 45 megawatt park in Bosnia that Kjetil is trying to keep up with, and that should be commissioned by the end of the year. So it's really we started for not so long ago, but have a very fast growing pace. A bit about what we deliver now in Greenstat. We cover mainly it's called the commercial and industrial segment. So not any residential buildings anymore. We started with that, but we got to a bit larger installations. So here are some pictures of installations that we made, like in rural areas in Norway with integrated technology. I'll come back to that. Or on also on agriculture building. As well as industrial buildings. And here we see some of the buildings that still have some snow on it, and facade installations. So this one has quite a big facade installation, southeast and southwest. And there is this one here with also a facade installation on the south facades on both sides and on the west facade. And this is actually our warehouse. So the picture on the bottom left side is where we sit, and here we have really tried to max out the number of panels on this building. It's here that we have one of our warehouse in the south of Norway. It was not our main focus for 1 year ago, but now it is clearly. It's ground-mounted solar parks, so utility scale constructions. And so, as I said, we are building a 45 megawatts park in Bosnia. I don't have a picture of it here, but I think it's coming later. Here is an illustration picture of a park that we will start the construction in a few months in Norway. So this is an illustration picture, and it's a 6 megawatt solar park. We are still waiting for a few agreements, but we expect to start building it very soon. And so this will be maybe Norway's first ground-mounted solar park. There has been a few pilot installations below 1 megawatt, but this will be the first utility scale grid-connected solar park. I think I had to a small video of the park in Bosnia, if it works. We'll see. Okay, back to the presentation. So that's the solar park I was talking about. That was already a few months ago. So now the panels are coming actually on all the mounting systems. Solar panel technology. So how does it work actually, a solar panel? It's a panel that absorbs light and converts it to electricity. So it should not be confused with solar thermal panels that are producing heat with fluid, which can be also very used for heating water, for every like heating needs in buildings. But when it comes to electricity, then the best is to use photovoltaic panels. So it's the photovoltaic effect, and the goal is to absorb then the photons. It's the particle of light, harvest them, and make as many electrons as possible. And electrons are what is conducting electricity. So we see the spectrum of light coming into the atmosphere. So it's the one with the colors. It starts from ultraviolet to the visible spectrum, so what we can see with our own eyes, to the near infrared and high infrared wavelength. So here it's in wavelength. And then we have to choose a material that can absorb this light and convert it into energy. And silicon is the most used material per today. Many alternatives have been under various research stages, but none have managed to surpass silicon in terms of efficiency and costs. And so what happens is that silicon will absorb from a certain wavelength, so it's from 1100 approximately, and everything above that is too low energy, so it will not be absorbed, and everything above that will have a higher energy, and the difference of energy you have between the 1100 wavelengths and if it's more, then it just lost. It's a process called thermalization. But the goal is just to know that it absorbs just at one wavelength, and then this is what we call the band gap of silicon. So silicon is a semiconductor. Just a bit of information. So here we go really quite deep into physics. So I think it's very interesting, but not everybody shares my opinion. But we see the process. So basically, we have electrons that are in this, it's called the valence band. And when they absorb the photons, suddenly they go on the conduction band, and they are an electron. And what remains is a hole. And the only goal of a solar cell is to manage to catch as many of the electrons as possible. And if you catch many electrons and you have a high enough energy for each electron, then it transforms into power. So you need to have a high enough band gap. And so it's the energy between the hole and electron, and that determines the voltage. And if you catch many electrons, then that determines the current. And so you need to maximize the two. And silicon is one of the best material to do so. And that's why it was the first solar cell was actually made of, yes, silicon, actually, in the 60s, if I don't say any mistake, in the Bell Lab. And now silicon still represents 85 to 90% of the total market for solar panels. So it's many call it a dinosaur, but nobody has managed to beat this dinosaur. Solar cell technology. So there has been a huge development in solar cell technology and mainly in the architecture. So here I'm just going to present three different architectures. And the first one is aluminum back surface field. So it was LBSF. And for 5 to 10 years ago, it was still the main technology. It was very easy to produce and very cheap. And we see that there are not many layers. So in terms of industrialization of this technology, it was relatively easy to achieve. However, efficiencies were quite limited. So it was very hard to obtain anything more than 19% efficiency for a solar cell. So then it has come the PERC solar cells, which are not shown here, which is now the main technology. It represents, I think, 50% now of market share. And the two new technologies that are coming are the TOPCon for tunnel oxide passivated contact. So it's very complicated names. And even I have a hard time to understand them if I don't dig deep into the technology, which is the number 2 here. We see that there has been many more layers. And the goal is, as I said, the goal is to have a high enough band gap to not lose too much voltage on that, but collect as many electrons as possible. And so new materials have come, but the base is still silicon. So the absorbing material in the middle is silicon, and it's just like here it's going to absorb then the electrons, and here it's going to absorb the holes and generate a current. And last technology, it's bifacial heterojunction. And so heterojunction is actually a technology, but bifacial, it's a cell which is made, and we see the pyramids that are made to absorb more light. It's a cell which is made to absorb light from both sides. And I'll come back to that, but it has many different opportunities, and it's now maybe the most used cell or like to have bifacial panels. It's the main technology for ground-mounted solar parks. And so here is one example. It can be made with heterojunction. I think for the moment it's mainly PERC cells, but because PERC is a bit easier to make and heterojunction, but heterojunction is really one technology coming, and that will allow us to achieve efficiencies between 24% and 26%, basically. Silicon is limited, and the best efficiency that can be obtained is around 30%. So there is an intrinsic limitation in efficiencies. If we want to go above that, then we'll have to choose other technology. Another technology that exists and which is very attractive for buildings is CIGS. It's cadmium, indium, gallium selenide. So it's many chemical elements in the element table, and it's basically a solar cell that can be almost printed, and we see an example here. So it's also flexible and very thin, and we see one of the architecture here. It has a bit of a lower efficiency and it is a bit more expensive, but it can be flexible, and it's much easier to adjust the size or the color due to the fabrication process. And these are big advantages when we want to have flexibility or when we want to adapt to some architectural criteria on the building. Something also coming, which is in an industrialization phase, is tandem cells. And tandem cell is the combination of two solar cells to increase efficiency. So here we see this is actually a heterojunction solar cell made of silicon, the lower part, and on top of that is a perovskite solar cell, which will absorb another part of the spectrum. So it will absorb more of the infrared wavelengths, if I don't say any mistake. And this will give efficiencies above 30%. But the main goal is, like, because many technologies have been developed that achieved more than 40%, but the main challenge is to make it cost effective so that it can actually compete on large scale. But if you hear about perovskite silicon in the maybe some of you have heard about that, but it's really something that people talk about. But just to be clear, it's not something coming this year. It's not something coming next year. It will not be. It might be a game changer, but it's in an industrialization process. So it might become a standard technology in 5 or 10 years, not before. Yes, and to conclude about that, it's about this first section is that different panels have different applications. And so we see, I talked about bifacial solar panels. Here we see how they can be adapted on the building to give a very nice aesthetic. Here is a solar park. It's actually bifacial panels too, because then they absorb from the backside. And as the ground is quite has a quite of light color, sand actually reflects a lot of light. So with using a panel with a slightly different technology, we can absorb between 10 and 20% more light due to the reflection on the backside. And that has made quite a change. So you use the same material, but manage to produce 10 or 20% more energy per square meter. So it's quite important. And here, this building is actually the international school in Copenhagen. And all the blue parts of the building are solar panels. So I think this is really cool. Actually, I think this building is really cool. And it's panels, and you see that they have slightly different colors, but actually it's not the colors that are different, is that they have been oriented slightly differently. So if we really take a look, we see that there are like some small dark parts between each panel, and it's because they have like a 5 or 10 degrees inclination towards one of the corner. So they are imbricated a bit differently from each other, which gives a very aesthetically pleasing look, I think. And so then we can have these very blue panels by having a layer on top of them. If you want to have this layer, one thing which is important is to know that it's going to reduce the efficiency. So you're going to have a unique building, but at the cost of a slightly lower efficiency, because the light coming back, which gives this blue color, is light not being absorbed. So we sacrifice some of the photons that could be absorbed to be reflected to our eyes and give this then, or they are not reflected, but they are kind of reflected. Installation types. There are many different installation types. Here are some pictures of installation types that can be found, and I'll start with flat rooftops. something which is extremely common in Norway is east-west installations. So this one here, it's because it gives more energy per square meter of rooftop. So you can cover your whole rooftop with panels by doing that. And then it's gonna give a bit of a more flat production curve than a south facing like this one or this one. But then it will produce less per panel, but it's very easy to mount. So it's a bit of a trade-off. And in Norway, the sun has a quite low altitude in the sky, and due to that we have quite a bit of shadowing from panel to panel if we were to use south facing. So then we need to spread them quite a bit compared to Croatia. So in Croatia it will be quite tight, and I know that in the main part of Europe it's quite a good blend between east-west and south-facing. In Norway, it's almost only east-west configurations. This one is a bit special because it's with, okay, I have to stop clicking, but it's with south-facing, but they have really put the panels quite with a strong inclination, and they have covered the rooftop with a white and very reflective coating. And the goal is to reflect a lot of light on the back side of the panels, because here as well it's bifacial panels. So it's an installation that exists in Norway. And I know that in many hot countries, so it might be the case also in Croatia, there are more and more companies that are painting some of the buildings in white, or like some of the rooftops in white, to reflect more of the sunlight in the summer and have less to absorb less light and generate less heat in the building. So they managed to decrease the temperatures in the building, especially in the summer when it's very hot. And then I don't know if you use any air conditioning systems, but then you need less air conditioning. So it was a good solution. And so that can be combined then with a solar system. I said that there are many companies coming with new systems. This is actually a Norwegian startup that came up with this system. So it's kind of a deconstructed solar panel. And so we see the solar cells. And so one row is one row of solar cells only. So a panel has been cut in many rows and spread vertically along this mounting system. And they have achieved extremely good results with this installation. It's very easy to install, and it can be combined with green roofs. These installations, south-facing as well, can be combined with green roofs if you have enough inclination. But I just thought that this example was quite nice. So there are still a lot of development. So it's still silicon solar cells. So they didn't change the technology, but they adapted to make it smarter and smarter and to be combined with more technologies. And what's really good about that is that green roofs, they absorb a lot of light, they give heat, they give insulation to the building, but they also reflect quite a bit of light. And as they decrease the temperature, solar panels actually perform better at lower temperatures. So it's a really win-win effect to combine the green roof with this type of installation. Why doesn't it want to go back? I'm not used to PDF, I guess. Why does my keyboard? Just give me a second. There you go. So pitched rooftops. For pitched rooftops, there exists many different mounting systems to adapt to every kind of technology. So they are for tiles, they are for flat tiles, they are for metal sheets. There are what else? You can integrate it into the roof. You have also something called bituminous rooftops. Some of them have like, generally you don't have a very high slope, but you can have like 10 degrees with that. And you have also technologies made for installing panels on these rooftops. So for whatever type of rooftop that you have, there is something that can be found to put solar panels on it, basically. And so these are actually installations that we made. And I just wanted to highlight this one, which is, as I talked about briefly, integrated in the rooftop. So we see the solar panels, and they have actually replaced, so there are no building element under the panels. There are just some frames that make the panels being waterproof. So the whole roof is waterproof, but otherwise there is nothing under the panels. Or like you need the construction of the rooftops, you need some of the battens, but otherwise it's open if you don't have anything under it. And so that's building integrated photovoltaics. It replaces building elements. Facades, many possibilities with different panels and different colors. We have mainly, in our company, we have mainly dealt with silicon panels because it's the cheapest. Then it's just like they are black. So they are not the most aesthetically pleasing panels, but as we were dealing with industrial actors, the financial aspect of it was, or the economic aspect of it was very important. So it's the panels that give the shortest payback time, basically. And then can be installed on existing facades, but they can also be integrated in facades. Another technology is, I talked about it, it's CIGS. And as it's a printed technology, then it's much easier to adapt and have different panel size. So you see that on this picture, all that is blue, kind of golden, and this azure blue or green are solar panels with different sizes. And then you don't see the solar cells in them because they have no solar cells. So it's a bit of a different technology. And I think that's what has been used also on this building. So it's CIGS. And so one advantage that we have in Norway, and we don't have many advantages, but one that we have is that we have a slightly lower sun, as I said. And so the facades in Nordic countries actually can produce a lot of solar energy. So I guess that they can produce maybe more than in Croatia, but I am not sure about that. I haven't studied that, but at least that's really something that we sell a facade installation in half of our installations nowadays on existing buildings. Integrated panels. So panels can replace building elements and give a new aesthetic to the buildings. So here, for example, it's a solution with these tiles. I don't know the name in English, but it's these old tiles that you could find on churches and in many countries in Europe that have this diamond shape. But here, actually, all of them are solar panels. So you can really see that there exist technologies or like solutions for every kind of building, for every kind of historical looks or criterias, or for financial criterias. Here is also an example of very small solar panels to make a kind of canopy. It's bifacial, so I think it gives a very futuristic look to the building to have bifacial panels, because you see the technology, but at the same time, it's well integrated. It gives like a glass aesthetic. And here the solar panels are in the facades. And so many technologies exist to adapt to different visual or historical standards. Church, glass roofs, facade elements, colors, sizes. You just have to pick what you want, and there is certainly a solution for that. As I said previously, if you want very bright colors, like people have said, oh, I want to have a white facade. Well, if you have a white facade, then you're gonna reflect most of the light back. So the clearer the facade, or like the color of the facade, the less energy you want actually to absorb in the solar panel, and the lower will be the efficiency. So you can find actually efficiency sheets according to the color that you can order. Oh, I have to stop rolling. My bad. I'm just too used to PowerPoint, I guess. Ah, there. No, I don't want to have this one here. There you go. I think we're back. No, we're not. Why is it in the... I don't want you here. Yes. Now I have it. I don't have it at all. Okay.
Charlie, maybe try using page down. It might be easier.
Page down, yes. Yes, okay. Then I change of keyboards. Page down. Now we'll talk a bit about the economy and like understanding how the system works actually. So production versus own consumption and costs. Something that you need is an inverter. So a solar panel will basically produce electricity, and it's going to be DC electricity, so DC power. So it means it's direct current. So it's like a constant current and not an alternative current, which is AC. And AC is what we have from all our grids all over the world. So you need to convert this DC power into AC power, and that's the role of the inverters. There exist string inverters, the most versatile one, the most used, and the only drawback is that if you have a bit of shadowing along a string, so you connect many panels in a string, if you have shadowing on one of the panel, which is, for example, very often on residential buildings, that you'll have another pole, electrical pole, light pole, or a tree, or anything that will put shadowing on one of the panel, then it will affect the whole string of panel. What you can do is use power optimizers. And you just put power optimizers where you think you're going to have shadowing, and then it's just going to isolate these panels from the rest, and your installation is going to work very well. You have central inverters. It's huge inverters, and it's for power plants. You have micro inverters. It's the best for small installations, so like small residential installations, or installations with different orientations, or with a lot of shadowing. So, for example, on facades, then we usually always, and not on industrial, but like residential in the center part of cities. That's what we would recommend. In industrial zones, then it's not very dense between the buildings, and usually we don't have shadowings between the buildings. So then you can avoid that. But otherwise, it's a very good solution for facade installations. And then you have something called hybrid inverters. It's just to connect a solar installation and the battery unit. So they hybrid as in that they can connect two different types of installations, solar and battery. And so inverters are then connected to the electrical board of the building. And the energy will first flow. So this is the solar installation. The energy will first flow inside of the building and cover the consumption in the building before it is sent to the grid in most of the installations. If the electricity produced from the solar panels is not enough, then electricity will be bought from the grid to cover the consumption. If too much electricity is being produced from the solar panels, then there will be an excess of energy, and this energy will be sold to the grid. So a solar installation will first cover their own consumption, the needs in the building before being sold to the grid. There were some other standards, as I can remember, for 10 years ago, where you had to sell everything to the grid first. But I think that now in most of the countries, this is not the case anymore, and that first you need to cover your own consumption. What we recommend and what we do, at least for our customers, is to have simulations with at least an hourly data of the consumption, and then simulate it with the production to see how much of the electricity hour per hour is going to be consumed in the building and will be sold to the grid to make a financial analysis. The value of the electricity sold to the grid is often lower than the one consumed in the building. So the one that you buy usually it's the price of electricity plus the grid tariffs plus some taxes. So it's always higher price than, or like most often, than the price you can get for selling the electricity. Earlier, there were some tariffs, for example, in Germany and in France, where you could sell the electricity for a much higher price than what you will buy the electricity from. But it was really to launch the technology. Today, you don't need that. So I don't think many countries in Europe have still these feed-in tariffs. But it might be that it's the case for Croatia. So it is important to design the solar installation with regard to specific criteria. What is the criteria in your building? Are you trying to make a zero energy building, for example? Then you need to equal the energy consumed with the energy produced by the solar installation. Is your goal the profitability? Then you shouldn't try to sell so much electricity to the grid. You have to have enough volume for the solar installation. So that's like the larger the installation, the cheaper you have it per watt installed. But at the same time, you don't want to sell too much. So here you have kind of a compromise. Solar production. Croatia actually, and especially along the coast, has some of the best solar resources in Europe. You can find the same in some parts of Italy and in Spain and Portugal. It's really high, getting above 1500 kilowatt hour per kilowatt peak is a lot. And so what that means, this kilowatt hour per kilowatt peak, is if you put a panel and you have 1 kilowatt peak installation, how many kilowatt hour are you going to produce with that panel? So it's just a ratio which is being used to compare different parts in a country and to say something about the irradiance and the solar resources. And also electricity prices and the volatility in them have strongly increased in Croatia. So before, electricity prices were quite stable like the rest of Europe, and then suddenly due to the war in Ukraine and to instability of the prices as they are depending on gas prices very heavily, then we have seen these big fluctuations. So today in Norway, for example, that has a lot of hydropower, Now we have also had a lot of very high electricity prices, and the payback time of most of the installations is of 8 years, maybe. So I guess that Croatia will have even shorter payback times due to the better solar resources. Cost and profitability. So here I'm just going to give some key numbers. The capital expenditure, so it's the investment cost, is between 1 to 1.6 euros per watt. 1 euro per watt will be for very large installation on on roofs where we can easily mount a system. So very large flat roofs, for example, around 1 euro per watt. But if it gets integrated, if it's a bit complicated, the architecture of the building, if it's not easy to come on top of the rooftop, if it's on the facade, then it goes up to 1.6 euro per watt. And for very new and innovative designs, then it can be maybe double that. So it's very dependent on the size, the type of installation, the colors, etc. And the operational costs, so the operational expenditure, it's approximately, for small installation, it's hard to have a service agreement, but for large enough installation, then usually they charge around 1% of the investment cost per year. I forgot to put per year. And so when we deliver a financial analysis, here it's in Norwegian krona, crowns, this graph. So it's the accumulated cash flow in the green histograms. With this is the investment. So the investment is in year 0, and then we see that every year it's producing electricity. But that's the annual electricity price. So it's a prognosis that we use in Norway about how a prognosis that we basically use, which is very conservative, that says that electricity prices we get back to normal, and it's approximately the same price that you had in Croatia before. So it's like it's 0.5 krona per kilowatt hour. So the most important for the financial analysis is actually what's prognosis of electricity prices you are using and how the electricity prices will evolve in time. But you can see a solar installation as a security in your electricity prices in the future. Basically, you secure that maybe half of your electrical consumption will come from a fixed price for the next 25 years. How green can it be? A bit about sustainability. So if we look at the life cycle assessment of different energy production units or technologies, then we see that actually solar PV is one of the lowest. It's not the lowest, but it's part of the very low carbon emission energy sources. Yeah, I guess I took that from a prediction for climate change policy. Yeah. So you see that wind is actually one of the lowest. Hydro is also very low, and then you have solar PV, which is approximately double that. It's quite high because most of the production of the solar panels is in China. And most of the panels, so it's quite energy intensive to make a solar panel or to produce the silicon, at least. And most of the energy that was used was from coal-fired power plants. They have a lot of coal-fired power plants in China. But now more and more of these manufacturers are using renewable energies to produce these panels. So the carbon footprint of the panels will continue to fall thanks to that. Another way is to add some requirements. So you can say that you want low carbon footprint, and you have companies in Europe producing very producing panels with very low carbon footprint. So it could be a possibility that you could have. One that I don't know if it's legal, but it's to say that you want to have it EU manufactured. I think actually it's illegal to put that in a public tender, but I know that the European Union is fighting now to get some of the production back into the EU. So Europe was the main manufacturer of solar panels in the 2000s. And then China had a very, how can I say that, had a very aggressive strategy and really wanted to become the main producer of solar panels in the world and got a lot of incentives from their government. So it was quite of a biased competition there. But Europe didn't do much to save its industry, and then most of it went bankrupt or got sold to China. So now between 90 and 95% of the production is in China, but new companies are being started in the EU and in Europe to start the manufacturing in the EU again. So I think it's very important, this point, and the EU is targeting that is trying to cover 40% of its needs from locally made solar panels. You can have also ask to have an EPD, which is an environmental product declaration. I think it's something that is available for the EU. It's not all manufacturers that have it, but it gives quite strict regulations on how it should be made. Things that I have seen from an industrial perspective is I have seen many public tenders that have required that part of the mounting system, at least 50% of the mounting system materials should be made from recycled aluminium, for example. And there are many companies that are selling recycled aluminium. I don't know about steel. I don't know about steel, but at least for aluminium, it's possible to get recycled aluminium, and you can make clear sustainability criteria in the tenders. And then you can also be smart in how you combine different technologies. For example, combining green roofs with solar roof is a great idea. And then you have something very sustainable. You have like still a green part. I think that these green roofs are really great for bees. So then you still have pollination going on. And then you produce solar energy at the same time. Or you can also use parking lots to build solar carports. I don't think I have shown any pictures, but there are more and more solar carports being built. And France has come now with an obligation for all parking lots that have more than 60 or 80 parking spots to cover their spaces with solar parking lots. So then it's going to make a lot of small or like relatively big solar installation in very gray areas. So it's areas that are dead in a way that because they are covered with a bit more asphalt. But then you can still use these places in a smart way to produce more solar energy or to produce more energy. Now a bit more about, yes, public tenders and what role could municipalities and countries have. Public purchasing power. It's something very important is that public purchasing power must be used more to achieve climate environmental goals. It's something which is commonly said in Norway, at least. And usually it's these public tenders that can set the new standards in the construction field. For example, in Norway, now we have zero emission construction sites. So all of the engines must be electrical or work on hydrogen. You can have require EPD for all the materials for new buildings. you can set standards for zero energy buildings. Usually, it's going to cost more, so it might not be a good financial decision. But generally speaking, public tenders is what starts new criteria, and it's what will build competencies in a country. So if you see that many buildings need to be renovated in the country, to start with the public buildings and start new competencies is very important, and that we have seen in Norway. It's also a way to test new strategies. For example, by setting quite difficult criteria about carbon footprint, about percentage of recycled materials. But it gives also opportunities to test new technologies, for example, BIPV or solar carports. And I think that it's public buildings can have a fine combination between very financially viable solutions, for example, flat roofs. Then we don't have to every time discover the wheel again. We can just build something very profitable, but also try to test new technologies, maybe on the facades, for example, with something that might not be profitable. Something that I forgot to say about BIPV, which is very important, is that building integrated photovoltaics replaces components in the buildings that you will have needed anyway. So if I take the example of a facade, if you wanted to have a glass facade anyway, then you need to compare the costs of the BIPV with the cost of a glass facade. And then your payback time will be just the payback time of these extra costs in this BIPV installation. It's very important because I've seen many people say, oh, it costs quite a lot. And then I don't have any payback time for that. It's like the payback time is 25 or 30 years. But they forgot that it just costs actually 25% more than a regular glass facade. And so it's just this extra cost, which is the most important part for BIPV. And it has been shown in Norway that actually the payback time is very short for most of the buildings who will have had glass facades anyway. Some measures that were taken, then it's not on public tenders, like it's not on public building, and it's not the public procurement power, but it's local measures that were made in different counties in Norway or different communes to incentivize solar installation. So, for example, there is an incentive in one commune in Norway called Greenstat for all the residential buildings that are, how do they call it, housing associations and sectional flats. So when you have like flat buildings, it's very hard to connect the solar installation to every of the electrical board in every flat. So what is being made is that you connect it to the centralized electrical board. One problem with that is that not everyone can, it can be a bit unfair in some places, and that some of the regulations, for example, in Norway, are not in place. The regulations for sharing electricity between different private persons, for example, in the flat building or between different companies, is not in place in Norway. And as I've understood, it's not in place also in Croatia. So then they have made incentives in some communes so that they will still use these buildings anyway, even though the regulations is clearly restricting something that should be financially viable. They are restricting that. Another measure for the residential market is that you could get in the Oslo municipality is that you will have an extra subsidy for solar installations. I don't go too much into the details, but you get a grant for advice, purchase, and installation. But something that was made also in a complete county is that too many industries are actually not aware and don't have enough information about solar installation. So then there was some grants that were made available for feasibility studies for solar installation. So then companies could then ask another company to provide them with a quote and to make kind of a financial analysis to know if it's profitable or not. And then they don't pay for that. So, or like they pay just 25% of that. And it creates awareness among the industries for solar installations, and that it can be actually very profitable for them. So it's a very cheap way for public actors to increase locally produced energy. Just let the people be aware that it's profitable, basically, and just pay for the small costs of the feasibility study. With that, I'd like to thank you all, and I think that we can open up for some questions if there are any.
Charly, thank you very much for a very good and intensive and interesting lecture. I can say that because we are about the same amount of participants attending the webinar now as when you started. So congratulations with that, Charly. Now, Charly, we have several questions in the chat being asked. And but before we ask you, there is a question related to if there will be a possibility and how to receive your presentation. And obviously there will be. So we will see to that those of you who would be interested, maybe we can send it even out to all by email. And as well, the webinar has been recorded, so we will also inform you shortly about how you will be able to access the recording. The first question to you, Charly, is from Alexander of the Eastern region. And the question reads, what is your experience with public bodies, investors, and their process of selecting areas that will be used for solar power plants? Do they research and make environmental impact studies for the power plants? Are there any problems or challenges in this process? That is the question for you, Charly.
Alexander, maybe you can reply to that, but are you talking about ground-mounted power plants?
Alexander, maybe you can fill in.
Yes, yes.
On buildings.
No, it's ground-mounted mostly, because we have here in the region of Istria some suggestions that power plants can be built on the ground, but also opposed to that, we have opinions that the land can be used in better ways. So I wanted to just ask, what are your experiences in this? And if you have any examples from Norway or from any other countries you have worked in.
Yes, it's actually a great question. And in Norway, the process is that there is an entity called NVE, which is the Norwegian Hydropower and Energy Committee, that is assessing all of the new power plant concession demands, and all of these demands have to have in annex an environmental impact study. So it's compulsory to deliver that for every concession that is being asked. And these have to be made from, I'm not really sure about that, but they have to be made by third-party actors. So you can't do that yourself, I think. And it has to be quite thorough. But then this question is very good, because it's one of the challenge that at least I know France and Germany are having, is that they have a limited territory, and they are saying now that more and more conflicts have arisen between solar and wind parks, because they use a lot of space. And this is why, especially for solar at least, that France now has made this obligation, and it's from 2024 or 2025, that all parking slots, like most of all the large ones, needs to be covered with a solar installation. And you see a lot more of agrivoltaics, and I didn't talk about that, but agrivoltaic is a combination between agricultural lands and solar power plants. And you have two main technologies. Let's say you have these vertical panels that are making rows, and you can still go with machines between the rows. Or you have panels that are being lifted above the plants. Or you have more like commonly ground-mounted solar power plants, but that are being quite lifted up, so that you can have ships under them. And I think that double usage of land is very important. One way to do that, and that's true, I think, for us, the countries that have some of the largest procurements in Europe, is that you have preferential power purchase agreements if you use a technology that will have double usage. Another very good example, and I think that hasn't Croatia a lot of islands? I think that you have, isn't it the 1,000 island country?
Yes.
There is a lot more plants coming with what are floating power plants. You have a lot on, for example, artificial lakes. You have a lot on water reservoirs where you have hydropower. But now you have near offshore plants coming. So it's being tested in many different countries. And that could be also a very good solution for Croatia. But I think that's, I don't know if I answered your question, but for example, in the solar parks that we are developing, we use, one is an industrial area that was being decommissioned because there has been some pollution in the land. So it's our first solar park in Norway is on that land. Another one was, how do you call it? Was just like a field where they were just like putting a lot of wasteland. So that's another park that we are planning. And then in Bosnia, it was more like of a mountain side with very little vegetation. So it was very rocky and very little biodiversity. So we found that these are good criteria for us, but it's something to be aware of. And I think that it's important that to not sacrifice too much on the environmental issues to gain profits, because it's going to make a lot of conflicts, and that will break then the continuous development, or like the continuous spreading of the technology. And so we see that there is a large slowdown in France and other countries for wind turbines, for example. Norway is also the case. So there has not been granted any concessions in 3 years now because of conflicts, because they have like this entity, this NV, which was supposed to, which is actually giving these grants, they have accepted a bit too many wind parks, very large wind parks in natural areas, and conflicts have been created because of that.
Charly, thank you very much. We have another question as well from Alexander, and the question reads, Are there any examples you could share with us of installing PV on historical or protected buildings? What is the practice in Norway and perhaps some of the other countries you worked in, Charlie?
It's a great question. So I have shown actually an example on the church. And then you can find, I know that there are a lot of European panel producers that are making their panels look kind of this red gray color, because many buildings have this, they need to fulfill some criteria about the color and the aesthetic of the building. So it's possible to find many great examples actually in Europe on how panels have been adapted or taken, or colors or the shapes have been adapted to replace some of like to make solar installations on these historical or protected buildings. So this church is one example with this like diagonal tile, but there is also like a Norwegian company making regular solar tiles, flat tiles, and many buildings also need that. I know that there is a German company, I think, making with this red gray tiles, but it's not something common in Norway, so we don't have any of that. But in many Mediterranean countries, you have these orange red tiles. So many technologies can be found, and they should be able then to fit in these criteria. Once again, yeah, I think it's to have a good dialogue, and many regulations will say you can't, but we have faced that actually in Norway, in Greenstat, but it's just that they don't know all the possibilities, and that we can just adapt and make it look as good, if not even better.
Do you know maybe perhaps what is the price difference between a normal photovoltaic panel and these roof tiles? Do you have any information on
that? It's between 50 and 100% more expensive, I would say, for the installation.
Okay, thanks.
They suffer from they have developed technologies for very particular buildings in a way, so they don't have a huge volume, so they can't produce it to the cheapest price like solar panels.
Thank you very much, Charlie. We have a next question that comes from Luca of the city of Pula, and it reads, I would like to know what is the time for a project to get to a neutral CO2 phase and then start really producing clean energy, considering gray energy used for production and also the energy needed for recycling of all those products, solar panels, storage batteries, transport, plus. Charlie.
It's a great question. And I'm not a carbon footprint expert, unfortunately. But I know that it all depends on how you are looking at it, what convention are you taking. If you look at the LCA numbers that I have shown, there is a footprint for everything that we do. So nothing is with the neutral CO2. So everything emits. But then if it replaces like a gray energy, so a coal-fired power plant, for example, if the goal is to produce more solar energy so that it replaces that, the summary, like in your budget at the end for the country, is that you're gonna use less your coal-fired power plant, so you do savings, you do CO2 savings. But the solar installation has a carbon footprint when you're like if you look at it very closely. And then in the carbon footprint, then you can have it cradle to cradle, and then it should cover all of the value chain up to recycling. And I know that recycling is something just starting in Europe, because the first solar parks were built in Germany in the 90s, late 90s, I think. So they are finally being decommissioned. So before that, there was nothing. So there was nothing to recycle. So now many companies are being started to recycle the panels. I don't know if I answered your question, Luca.
Luca, are you happy with the question, the answer?
Well, honestly, not really. It's I think it's not the point to install a lot of more efficient panels. I think energies. I think the point is to see if it is actually green energy. If by the end of 30 years that the panels last, we still produced a lot of gray energy, I don't really see how it works.
Okay, I don't really know what you mean by gray energy. And actually, I don't really like to use colors, but
No, sorry, I'm sorry. Gray energy, if I'm not mistaken, it's the energy consumed to produce to get the product there, to get the panel. How much did we
yeah, it's a great
produce
question.
CO2 to get it there? That's gray energy, right?
The energy payback time of a panel is between 1 and 2 years. So it means that it takes quite a bit of energy to produce a panel, but actually the panel will produce more energy than what was needed to produce it in 1 or 2 years. But then as to the CO2, I don't really know the energy mix in Croatia and what's your levels of CO2. But if you have more than 10 or 20% of fossil fuel in your electricity mix, then it's quite sure that solar installations will have a lower carbon footprint than your actual energy mix, electricity mix. For the energy mix, most of the countries actually have between 30 and 60% fossil fuels in their energy mix. So for the energy mix, that's certain.
Charlie, the next question is as well from the city of Pula, and it's from Ivana. It goes somehow a little bit perhaps in the same direction. The question reads, thank you very much for a great presentation, very informative. Do you know what is the today trend in recycling or reuse of solar cells and installation of their use when their use after their useful life has expired? If you know, what efforts are being made in that field? Charlie.
When I was still in the academic world, there was a lot of research on efficient ways of recycling panels, because actually solar panels have have materials inside that are quite precious, and one of them is silver. The other, as I said, it was aluminum back surface field cells. They have a lot of aluminum, which is very easily recycled. And then you have a lot of glass and other materials that have less value, but that are also very easily recycled. So there was a lot of research and prototypes. But the only thing lacking was volume. There was no panels to be recycled. So I just repeat myself, but the first few solar parks that will be decommissioned in, I think it's in Germany, will come in the coming, or like maybe they are coming now in the coming years. So the recycling industry will start soon. And it's a bit the same principle as for the battery recycling. It's something that we see now in Norway, and they have some recycling plants, I think, in for the electric vehicles. Sorry, they have a recycling plant also in Spain. But the people making the batteries, they see that if they can have some of the materials back for making the batteries at a lower cost, and have the batteries have a lifetime of between let's say 5 and 8 years, maybe now it's more, maybe it's 7 to 10 years now. But the first batteries had a very short, or like a bit shorter lifetime, and as they didn't have a long range, once you get below 80 kilometers in range, then it's very hard to drive anywhere. So these batteries came, and then they see that recycling them is a huge potential. But the problem with solar panels, or the problem, it's actually the good thing, is that the lifetime of a solar panel is 25 years. But from the first solar panels that were installed, for example, in Norway, they see that the degradation of these panels in colder climates goes even slower than in hot climates. So they expect the solar panels to have a lifetime of more than 30 years in Norway. So the solar parks that we are planning now, they will last quite a long time.
Charlie, there is another question, and it's a short one. It says, return of investment is faster in Croatia than in Norway, ? And there is a follow-up comment. Of course, it is faster because it's more sun. So anyway, it's a question for you. What is your input on that, Charlie?
The return on investment, it depends. The first one is the solar production. The other one is what's the price you get for the energy. And that I don't know in Croatia. So I don't know if you have any feed-in tariffs, but if it's the same electricity prices, if most of your buildings, I know it's not the case, yeah, like industrial buildings. I think that for the industrial buildings, if I don't say any mistake in Croatia, you are also on the spot market. And so it's varying hour per hour. And then you have these huge variations during the day, and also very high prices these days. So my guess is that the return on investments should be much shorter in Croatia, as you have between 30, let's say that you have 30 to 40% more sun.
All right, the next question as well comes from Alexander, and the question reads, what is the resistance of solar panels to strong wind gusts, and what are the best ways for securing or anchoring them when they are exposed to these gusts of wind, for example, in parking lots near the sea? Charlie.
It's a very good question. So most of those solar panels actually withstand very well the wind gusts. The problem is the mounting system. And if we take the example of a parking lot and you want to have this carport on top of that, then it's up to the engineering team. So it's like a building design. You need to make sure that the engineering team have designed the whole installation for the wind gusts in this particular area. If it's an area which is along the coast in a very exposed place, then this needs to be taken into account.
Charlie, there is a follow-up comment actually that the winds could be stronger than 100 kilometers per hour, just for your input.
Yeah. We have sold an installation along the coast on one of the small islands in Norway, where they have, just next to the island, where they have installed the first wind park in Norway, actually. And so they have a lot of wind there. I guess they have as much maybe as in Croatia. And it's actually an installation which is east-west with no anchoring, but just a ballast. So we use rocks, like construction blocks to on the rails to make it very heavy, and so that it's kind of anchoring, but we don't go through the roof. We just use ballast, and this installation is still in place today. The customer hasn't called us yet, so it's possible, if you do the engineering right, to have even that kind of installations with no anchoring whatsoever in very exposed areas.
Thank you very much, Charlie. There are no further questions asked in the chat, but I think we should give the audience an opportunity of asking additional questions if there are additional questions. So are there anyone that would actually ask Charlie any particular questions? You now have the opportunity to take the floor. Anyone? It seems, Charlie, that there are no further questions. I believe then, Alexander and other project members, that we should probably then call it the day for the webinar. And Alexander, would you have any final remarks to the webinar?
I would like to thank you again, both our Norwegian partners and Charly, for a great presentation. We will make the presentation, the recording of this whole webinar available. I will talk to Christina from ZES so we can make it available on the project webpage, so everyone can see it there, or maybe even download it and distribute it to other people that might be interested.
Well, then, as the leader of this meeting, thank you very much for attending. Thank you to you, Alexander, and as well to Christina for organizing this webinar. Thank you as well a lot to you, Charly, for giving a great lecture. And then we will be online with a similar webinar in the autumn. So I hope to see all of you back then. Thank you very much, and I wish you a wonderful further Thursday afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Steiner, I think we can stop the recording now.